Hello and welcome to this edition of Defacto Review, a weekly roundup of the big stories shaping Mongolia. Here with us tonight is economist and commentator Jargal Defacto, and I'm Terrence Edwards. We're live on Facebook at VTelevision. We want to hear your thoughts, so please tweet us on Twitter with the hashtag Jargal_Defacto. Coming up on the program. MPRP challenges Officials challenge MPRP's nomination as party's named presidential candidates. Prime Minister Erdogan travels to China from Mongolia's place in One Belt, One Road. Mongolia to sell 19 billion Chugrik bonds on Mongolia Stock Exchange. Officials have challenged the Mongolian People's Revolutionary Party's presidential nominee, Namber Enkbayer, in his bid for the presidential election. Enkbayer was expected to join the Democratic nominee, Haltma Batolga, who is also currently under investigation for a craft, and the Mongolian People's Party's Miagomb Ekbold for the presidential race scheduled for the 26th of June. That was until a high court announced that his 2012 conviction for graft will keep Enkbayer's name off the ballot. Enkbayer was found guilty in 2012 for the illegal privatization of the Ergo Hotel and the building that housed the newspaper, the Ulaanbaatar Times. President Sakya Elbajorj pardoned Enkbayer in 2013, just days after he was re-elected as president that June. But Enkbayer is still being held accountable for his unfinished sentence. So, Jargal, how does the court have this ability to make this ruling, and why is it stepping into block?
Well, a few hours earlier today than our program, the election committee had refused to register Mr. Enkbayer as a candidate for presidency.
So, and that's a final decision?
That's the election committee decisions.
Okay.
Election commission decisions, and they make an argument that there should be 5 years non-stop living in the country by the candidate prior to the election day. And they say, since Mr. Enkbayer was in Korea for quite some time, more than a year, but he was on on treatment, medical treatment. But they have refused to accept that, and now, as we speak of, Mongolian People's Revolutionary Party members and supporters of Mr. Enkbayer are now going to make demonstrations. They go to Chingiltay district, one of 8 districts of Ulaanbaatar city, for permission to rally in coming days. So now, as we speak of now, we legally have now 2 candidates from 2 ruling parties. So the question is now, what happened and why is that so? First of all, I see it's another problem with the election committee. In Mongolia, election committee the head of election committee is usually nominated by ruling party, and somebody who was always being in charge or in the service of those 2 political parties are historically always was or is the head of the committee. So that's one problem in Mongolia. Instead, we suggest Mongolia must have an electorate committee consisting of voters and consists of people that Mongolian people well receiving. So that's another problem, and I think down the road we will have a lot of noises around that cancellation. Otherwise, now what about the remaining 2 political party candidates? The missing issue is about their program. We don't know, the voters don't know yet who are these. We know more or less from the public and the social media that these people have been doing this and that, good things, bad things.
They're public figures, they're well known.
Yes, but we don't know what is their positions today on the economic and the crisis, how they see the role of market economy, how they see the role of government and market and their relations. We don't know. And yet we need to find the solution of the major causes of the crisis, which public tend to find in politics rather than in economics. And it is mostly caused by corruption. It is also mostly caused of inefficiency or non-maturity of political and economic institutions.
Yeah.
How they will address these issues, we don't know.
Yeah.
And how they will also address an issue of political party financing, in particular of their own political parties, where those financing come from and where they have been spending for. These are the issues we don't know. And yet it's so important for voters to make final decisions about whoever the candidates are, 2 or 3 candidates for the presidency.
Do you think corruption this year is shaping up to be a main central thing for this year's election? And why is this year becoming such a prominent issue? It's not exactly a new one.
Yeah, this year is coming, it's even more important because unlike 4 years ago, today Mongolia is in a big foreign debt. And budget deficit is huge. The foreign and domestic debt of the country is almost equal to a little bit less than to the GDP. And the question is, what happened with the money we have received from the bond proceeds? It is not clear there to the details who and how benefited from this bond proceeds, and why we would not pay from those where the bond proceeds spent. Who is taking responsibility for that? It turned out a lot that it was really bipartisan agreement. Their members, their related businesses have been receiving these bonds and using in a very inefficient way. And when the time comes to pay, they're not ready, and now people have to pay. So that's why the public still believes that many things is done without public proper consent, and people demand that transparency of the governance, where we find many things coming because there's corruption, in particular corruption in political parties, in their political campaign financing, and in general financing of the political party. So that's why it's so important for people to not only know the cause of this corruption, but also erase the corruptions, decrease the corruption. And what are those positions? Because both candidates are a lot regarded, be connected much in this corruption scheme in the country.
Yeah, I think it's also worth noting that the revelation of Mongolian names being included in the so-called Panama Papers, which gave awareness that some people in Parliament have offshore bank accounts, has also perturbed some voters. And also, on top of that is the fact that there were some authorities that tried to block investigative journalists' attempt to look into it any further. So there's a lot of questions on the minds of where are the interests of our politicians in our country at the moment, I believe.
Yes.
So, getting back to Enkbayer, he's widely popular despite these corruption allegations that continue to dog him. Can you explain this? And actually, how can he act as a spoiler for the MPP candidate if he was allowed to run?
People are confused with the judicial system of the country. Why ex-president of the country was arrested for some crimes he made, then if it is so serious crimes, why after he got penalty for 2 years, 6 months, 2.5 years penalty in prison. And he was mostly serving not in prison, but in hospital number 2 due to sickness. But he was immediately pardoned by the President Ilbegdor just after he got elected.
Yes.
And prominent parliament member Tirbish Tauger wrote in his book recently, become popular book, he said that it was an agreement of President El-Baghdadi and the Inkbayar, where the delegates visited him in hospital number 2, that he will not participate in the election, and then he will be pardoned next day almost. So this sort of injustice behavior of our leaders give people a lot disbelief in the current government.
Yeah. It raises questions, though, why that agreement would have had to be made, since right now, years later, they are blocking his attempt.
No, as I told you, it is about injustice in the society.
Sure.
Injustice, you know, if justice is in the society is after what is remaining, injustice got penalties. So in the country, there is not justice because our injustice never gets penalty.
Yeah.
So somehow these two political parties and their leaders agree upon certain things, and they are bargaining about the penalties for injustice. As a result, many high-ranking officials are remaining out just in normal positions, sometimes even upgrading or nominating somewhere. So people are fed up with this injustice. That's why they see Inkbayar as like wounded, come out at this election, and they will try to make, he will try to make more clean governance. That was somehow a part of people's hope, that if he is if he is running, they will elect him. And certainly, because this injustice is huge, and they are looking for ways to clean up the society better. And the Inkbayar is the ideal figure, if not to win this election, he was the figure to divide the power, the voices, so that these two candidates, none of them win. So if he is not winning himself. So that was very not good competitors for the other two political parties' nominees.
Yeah. You know, we're getting right out of the gate, and it's not even campaign season when politicians are legally allowed to start begin campaigning for themselves. Do you think this is going to be a particularly ugly campaign season?
Unless they will go for debate on several issues that Mongolian public needs answers from these two candidates. The issue of corruption, first of all. The issue of their general political parties' financing, in general, in particular, of these two parties.
Yeah.
And the society wants to know why the social inequality keeps increasing in the society. Why, for example, where the origin of all this misdoing, wrongdoing in the society? Is it not in the education field, for example? Why, for example, if education allows private investment, private schools and public schools, why public money goes to a lot private schools where a lot former politicians, former government ministers, former parliament members own schools. So they are receiving money from the budget for public schools where the money is not enough for public schools. And the schools' education is so bad that they don't give, try to have somehow knowledge, but they don't give that basic the skills of behaving, of human relations, societal relations. So this sort of things what is missing in Mongolian society. And the key point also this election is about, in general, how not mature, I would say, of civic society in this country. And of course, our non-independent media, which are mostly all of them, almost, play, unfortunately, a very negative role, being not dependent. So they play and they broadcast the news that please their owners. So that's why this kind of circle is happening, vicious circle in the society. Without proper information, civic society is not developed properly. It is not developed also because then because the corruption is coming up. So that's the Mongolian society's situation today.
We're going to keep chugging along with the story that concerns Mongolia's railways. Prime Minister Jargeltoga Erdenbek was in China last week for the One Belt, One Road Forum. The visit was the Prime Minister's first since a row with Chinese officials over the visit by the Dalai Lama last November. Spanning more than 68 countries and encompassing 4.4 billion people and 40% of the global GDP, the aim of China's One Belt, One Road is to boost travel and trade for this region. But the highly minded project may be more fantasy than an achievable reality, as it has been next to impossible to lock down criteria for how any given project would or could fit into the overall initiative. Also this week, leaders from the Chinese Railways, Russian Railways, Belarusian Railways, Deutsche Bahn, the national company Kazakhstan Tamir Zoli, Ulaanbaatar Railway, and Polskie Kolej Państwowy signed a multilateral agreement to deepen cooperation on the organization of container trains between China and Europe. So this is a really big initiative. Mongolia has a lot of interest to get involved. It would mean a lot of money for the country to be part of this logistics chain. So what else can you tell us about the significance of this project to Mongolia?
Well, that's been talked a lot about, that significance. At the level of 3 presidents, 3 meetings in the different countries, and all ministers. And so far we see only talks. We don't see any movement, a realistic movement in the society. And when the leaders meet, we talk about only this One Belt, One Road, but so far no result, nothing. And I'm not sure even when it comes to. That's the concern, because major road, everything connecting China and Europe comes through Kazakhstan and Russia. So, Kazakhstan, partially Russia, and also Belarus, and then go to Europe. So we will see. I mean, we have enough seen talks. I don't know what is the real result out of it. One point. The second point, the visit of our Prime Minister to China has another importance for Mongolia. I mean, China had promised $1 billion support, or another 2 billion RMB loan whenever this country needs.
As part of the rescue efforts for
yes,
Mongolia's
and these kind of things are different than the IMF package offered. IMF requires particular conditions to check Mongolian commercial banks, their assets, classification of the assets, today's state of those assets. They require certain limited expenses of budget. So if IMF is not coming, these things are not happening in Mongolia. And without truly, seriously reliable banking sector, which is the only source of money in the economics, the country is going to have even more problems, along with the urgent need to pay foreign debt. So that's why Mongolian Prime Minister asked them to help, and actually, I mean, in diplomatic language, things go like cooperation goes very well at high level, etc., etc. But in the simple, plain language, Mongolians become beggars. And the question is, the Prime Minister goes and begs money. So now the question is for the society, what happened on the earth for Mongolians, which has such a big land, so many mineral resources, animals, and then why we are so poor? And the answer that politicians don't want to give, but people slowly discovering, is corruption. And nobody's addressing the issue. And a clear example of this 3 candidates issue. So without addressing corruption, without eliminating or decreasing it, Mongolian economy, nothing will help Mongolian economy. $5 billion, $10 billion, still it will go in corrupt way.
Yeah.
Dragging the country into a bigger debt of the foreign and domestic debt.
Getting back to the original One Belt, One Road initiative, it's been proven before such initiatives are really hard to get through. Getting so many countries on the same page and agreeing to the same projects. Asian Development Bank has tried something similar with their CARIC initiative, and really it's gone nowhere. This might be a little bit different because now it actually has a big player, China, with a lot of money behind it, especially with this Asian infrastructure AIIB, which is supposed to be a sort of alternative to the Asian Development Bank and other institutions like it. So it will be really interesting to see where this goes.
Yep.
You mentioned China's role as far as the rescue efforts. Is China becoming too much, is there too much dependence on this one neighbor? It's already such a big contributor to Mongolia's economy because it's the #1 trade partner.
We came already too much dependent on China. And now this new deal without IMF will go even deeper, that dependence. So now the concern is, and plus this Chinese loan, all this discounted loan they call it, are coming not with the restriction of the government actions, expenses, etc. There is no conditions initially. But later, when the time comes, it will be conditioned, because why China should give their own money to the neighbor where the irresponsible politicians spending the money in a irresponsible way, at the end, not the people properly benefiting, but only a few politicians or a few businesses connected with the politicians having these benefits. So when the time comes to pay these big debts, that's going to be a problem. And for the current politicians, it is not a concern. When the time comes, the next after will be responsible. At the end, it means Mongolians, every household, will be responsible. And yet, half of the country is poor. No jobs. We don't see the creation of new jobs in the country. We hear big projects, but nothing moves. That's the concern, that every household has a big headache now.
Yeah. And finally, for our last story, Mongolia has announced a debt offering worth 19 billion tugrik, or about $7.9 million US for May 16th on the local Mongolia Stock Exchange. The announcement follows vows from the government to reduce debt while enforcing tax hikes and cuts to social welfare. Mongolia's proposed interest of 13.9% for the 3 months bill. So can you just give us some background where this bond offering is coming from, who's proposing it, and what the significance is?
Well, this 19 billion is just a small part of the whole year around planning of the government. Ministry of Finance have announced that this year they will issue total about close to 1 trillion tugriks government domestic bond. Okay, and it is from 3-month terms to 3 years, so different, and they do. Every quarter, it is around 330 or so on the average billion tugriks bond.
So this is the first of many offerings.
Yes, there will be each month 2 or 3. Total in a quarter should be some 12 or so. And what happens is now government having no possibility to raise fund abroad, now they are raising fund inside. And they are competing with the commercial banks because their bond annual interest rate was at times, remember, 17-18%.
That's what I was going to say. This doesn't seem very competitive.
And now it's going decrease. They say 14% around, but still it is the level of saving interest rate the commercial banks offer to customers. So it is the big interest of commercial banks to buy everything, but luckily, unluckily, but the stock exchange, through a stock exchange, some of them will go through, or everybody can buy in a way, but they are big.
So the main buyers will most likely be the banks
The
who
coupon-
are already offering interest rates at this around here.
Yes, the coupon is large, 100 million or $100,000 equivalent. But what does it say is, now nobody is limiting the government's domestic borrowing. That means government is now start paying their current costs through domestic bonds, making deeper and deeper a country into the debt hole.
And there's already such cross wires all over the place because the Bank of Mongolia is lending to commercial banks, and commercial banks are lending to the development bank and the finance ministry. There has to be some conflicts here.
Everybody is lending money in a way, and unfortunately, at the end, the money is the whole thing is going through the public debt, which the ordinary people pay. Now you see, by the end of this year, the forecast is Mongolian foreign and domestic debt together will be 80%. Now it's almost 100% of GDP, or almost equal, but it's going to be a little bit decreased, they say. Assuming that the GDP will increase, price for copper, coal, and it will be increasing, that's the assumption. And then they say at the end of the year, a country will have 84% of GDP equivalent foreign and domestic debt, out of which, out of those 84%, 50% would be foreign debt, 34% will be domestic debt. So still Mongolia is in a big debt, and yet they keep issuing. There is no other choice until IMF money comes. Even with the IMF money, they will keep borrowing domestically. Now the question is how big you can borrow.
Yes.
And who will be responsible for proper spending this money? Who is the independent watch of the efficiency of every public money? That issue is not clear. As the practice says, governments just keep borrowing, keep paying. At the end, they leave. Next government comes, cries, and tells the people that it was the fault of the previous government. Now we have to get together, and we will all to put our belt stronger.
Yeah.
But at the end, government does not. Government does not cut their cost, but the people does through the increased taxes. That's the unfortunate economic picture in the country.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this is not something voters are going to be particularly concerned with when they go to the elections this June. It's more of a long-term problem, and their voters are usually more self-interested. So it's really hard for them to think about such an issue.
In particular in Mongolia voters, because it is not much developed a civic society.
Yeah, there's a problem with financial literacy as well.
Sorry.
So there's a lot of issues to take in there.
Really. So let's see what is happening, what those competition of the candidates will bring to our life in this month to come.
Okay, well, I'll let you have the last word there. That's our program for the evening. We hope our summaries have given you a leg up for when you return to the work week on Monday. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, and you can watch from tomorrow this program again on jargaldefacto.com, and the previous version was in Mongolian just an hour before. Thank you very much for spending an evening with us, and good luck. And
Good night, Ulaanbaatar.
bye.